What's up guys, Will of DDT here. Today we're bringing you another deck profile. This time it's going to be a purple king deck. I know a lot of people don't think this leader is any good. That's precisely the reason why I actually wanted to make a deck out of it, just to show that any leader can be used properly. The reason why people don't think this card is that good is because of its leader ability. Its leader ability, if you guys don't know, is when you have 10 done on your field, whether that's attached to somebody or rested or whatever, all of your opponent's characters lose 1,000 attack. It doesn't include their leader, so I know that kind of turns off a lot of people. But if used properly and you build the deck properly around him, he actually can be pretty effective. The deck I made today is actually surprisingly effective and actually very budget friendly. It utilizes a lot of counters and it just plays on curve. So if you want to stick around for the reasoning as to why I put some cards in, you can follow along with the video. Otherwise, we'll have some timestamps below. That'll take you straight to the deck list. So without further ado, we can go straight into it. Starting with the one cost, we actually only have 4 of them. We have 4 Kurozumi Orochis. So you never really want to play the one cost. You just want to keep these in your hand because it's a 2k counter. Realistically, the first time you want to play a character is when you get to turn 4 or when you have 4 done. So realistically, you always want to go second, because if you go first, you're technically waiting 3 turns before you can get to 5 done. So you want to go second. So that way, by the time it's turn 2, you have 4 done, you can kind of start playing into your characters. So right after that, like I said before, we're going to go into our 4 costs. So the first 4 costs I want to go into is a very common combo. Obviously, you have the 4 ultis and you have the 4 page ones. This is pretty self-explanatory. You play ulti. Her on-play effect is you -1 Don. And if you have a page 1 in your hand that costs 4 or less, you can play him for free. In addition to that, ulti is actually a really good 2k counter. So even if you don't draw the page 1, the ulti is very good as well. So even if you kind of brick without having a page 1, ulti is always good to keep in your hand. Going to the next one, you have the Scratchmen Apoos. So you'll see with this deck list that you will be having a lot of vanillas. So the reason for the vanillas is because a lot of the purple vanillas, they are very high power while being low cost, while also having counter values. So you always want to make sure you have as many cards in your hand. That way you're always ready to counter, because there are no blockers or very few blockers in this deck. So you always want to make sure you play these cards on curve. That way you're always pressuring the opponent and make them use their resources to block these cards. The next cards are the 5 costs. A very common 5 cost in purple decks is the 5 cost X Drake. Again, this card isn't really being used to be played. You're using this for the 2k counter. It has a fairly decent on-play effect if you want to close out the game and they have a few cards in their hand. When you play him, you can -1 Don, and you'll actually force the opponent to discard a card, which can come very clutch in those last few moments when you're trying to get that last Don off of them. The next one is Queen. This is actually going to be the only blocker we run in this deck. What's really good about this card is the fact that it is, obviously it's overstated. It's a 5 cost 6k power. But in addition to that, if you -1 Don when you play it, you draw 2 -1. So you're always getting card advantage when you play Queen. So that's very important in this deck, where you're kind of countering a lot with all the cards in your hand. Next is another vanilla, my boy Babanuki. Babanuki is one of my favorite cards in this deck, just because of how annoying it can be for the opponent, especially if they're red. The reason for that is because it's only a 5 cost. Even if you go first, you play him at 5 and he's at 7k. He kind of puts he puts him out of range for jet pistols. Is that what it is? Puts him out of range for jet pistols, so it makes him very safe to play on curve. After that is Kyoshirou. This is a very important card just to make sure you're keeping card advantage, because his effect is on play. You draw a card if you have 8 or more Don on the field. That's a very important term to remember, the fact that it's on the field. It doesn't matter if it's rested, unrested, or attached to a character. If it's anywhere on the field, it'll count towards this effect. So you always want to make sure you're playing Kyoshirou when you can, just to make sure you're keeping that card advantage when you're countering. Next up are our 6 costs. We have the first vanilla 6 cost, which is Fukurokuju. Again, just a really strong beat stick, 6 cost without being 8,000 attack. Again, out of range for a lot of delete events. So you want to make sure you're playing this whenever you have the chance. If not, it's always really good to have 1k counters. So it's always good to keep them in your hand, and if you can, make sure you get them on the board. Now, this is one of the select few cards in the deck that do not have a counter, but is in it because of how important this card can be. I only run 3 King in this deck. I know a few deck lists I've seen run 4, but I think 3 is perfect without breaking too hard on it, just because it's not a counter. We do want to limit the amount of non-counters in this deck. Again, it's a very important effect. On play, you -1 Don, and you can just straight up KO any character on their side of the field with the cost of 4 or less. This is really important for closing out games to get rid of any high cost blockers. And it's really good setting up plays for your higher cost cards. Next up is another really annoying card for other people to deal with, is Urashima. Now, this card is super strong just because of how cheap it is, and you're putting a 9k attacker on the board. Very few cards are able to deal with this, and if they have to deal with it, they have to spend a lot of resources to get rid of it. So making sure that you get this out here when you can, and if you have the spare Dawn, it would be really important to getting that extra life off of the opponent. And for the game finishers, you have the 4 structured Kaidos. Now, this you only want to use when you are confident that you're going to be winning the game, just because due to King's leader effect, you want to make sure you have 10 Dawn on the board as long as possible. What Kaido does when you play him, you have to -5 Dawn, and when you do, you'll actually KO one of your opponent's characters that cost 6 or less, which is really strong. And in addition to that, it gives it rush. So it's really good for closing out games, swinging for that last life and leader attacks. Then that could just completely destroy your opponent and win the game for you. And just to finish off the deck list, we have more draw power with the Ulti-Mortars. Ulti-Mortar is an all-star of this deck just because whenever you use it, the counter value is decent. It only gives 2,000, but the real value of it is when you are able to draw a card. Again, majority of the cards in this deck are all counters, so you want to make sure you have as many counters as possible, just because you don't have many blockers to deal with any rushes or the green leader kid that can attack twice if he has 3 Dawn. So having this here just to give you some more draw power and more card advantage is always going to be helpful. And it has a very useful trigger effect. If it's hit in your life, the trigger is you can add 1 Dawn from your Dawn deck and set it as rested, or sorry, set it as active, and that'll just help you ramp up a bit more. So that is the deck list, guys. It's very budget friendly. It's very effective. I was play testing with it. I saw good results with it. It's really hard to deal with the big blockers and the big bodies when they're on the board. So you're always generating value whenever you put something on the board, and using your counters effectively is key, just to make sure you're not using you're over countering, because if you do, you won't be able to use any of the big bodies on the board. Thanks for listening, guys. We have the deck list laid out here in case you want to take a last look at it and see any of the ratios. This is a super fun deck, and I hope you guys enjoy playing it. If you guys enjoyed this deck profile, make sure to check out our other videos. The last deck profile we covered was the red-green law deck. You can find that link in the description below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It really does help the channel, and we hope to see you guys in the next video.